We wish to welcome everyone for joining. We're going to give it just a couple of more minutes before we get started. So thank you all for attending, and we'll get started shortly.
All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We're going to get started now. My name is Moses Khisa. With my colleague, Professor Jonathan Al, I am the co-chair of the Uganda Studies Group. The Uganda Studies Group is an affiliated organization of the African Studies Association here in the United States. We work to create and strengthen international networks between writers, scholars, journalists, artists, public thinkers of and in Uganda. While we are an academic group, we seek engagements beyond the narrow confines of the academic guild. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and on our website, www.ugandastudiesgroup.org. Today's engagement is part of a series of conversations with leading scholars of Ugandan politics and society about their scholarship, public service, and civic works. If you'd like to present a paper, launch a book, speak about an intellectual project, or provide insights on issues about Uganda, please get in touch with me or Dr. John R. It's my great honor and distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Jimmy Ssentongo, who is a former head of the Department of Philosophy at Makerere University, where he teaches ethics and research methods. Dr. Ssentongo is also an associate professor of ethics and identity studies at Uganda Matters University, Nkozi, where he was founding chair of the Center for African Studies. He also serves as head of research at Nkozi and editor of the monograph series Utafiti Mwafrika, African Researcher, and the Uganda Matters University book series. Dr. Ssentongo holds a PhD in Humanistic Studies from the University of Humanistic Studies in Holland, a Master's in Ethics and Public Management, a Master of Science in Education for Sustainability, a Bachelor's in Philosophy, and a Diploma in Philosophy and Religious Studies. He was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for African Studies at the University of Cambridge and a research fellow at the African Humanities Program. Many of us know Dr. Ssentongo as a columnist and editorial cartoonist with the Observer newspaper in Uganda. His several books include The Colonization Pathways, Quarantined, and What I Saw When I Died. He has also published widely in peer-reviewed journals. Brother Jimmy, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you're doing well. I read somewhere that you might be arrested because of your Twitter exhibitions on the state of roads in Uganda and the healthcare system. Are you by any chance under arrest, or you are a free man?
I'm a free man. Good evening, Khisa. I'm very happy for this opportunity to join this space.
I'm asking because there is a... Sorry, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, sure, you are still asking?
As on insult. It borders on insult, or it borders on some sort of abuse. Yes, it can be an insult that is meant to fight back, that is meant to hurt, that is meant to make an oppressor feel bad, just as they make you feel bad about something else. So I look at humor as quite effective in different fronts, although we cannot measure it in empirical terms to say that this has happened because of the deployment of humor in this particular way. And I've seen that Ugandans are adopting it in many other kinds of fighting. There are satirical satire efforts that perhaps some analysts have not noted or taken keen interest in. For instance, when a group of people take pigs and throw them at Parliament, that is a satirical act of fighting back. When someone takes a TV to Parliament, I think this was some council at a certain point, in resistance to taxes on viewing TV. It is a satirical act that disempowers the powerful or the oppressor. I keep using the word oppressor in quotes. That if you're seen to be fighting back for a person who appears to be making fun, to Bizonto, if you've seen the skits of Bizonto, especially those that were talking about tribalism, if you're seen to be fighting back to a man who gets an effigy of the president, puts it on the streets and starts caning it, there is a way you look ridiculous, and in looking ridiculous, you're arming us with more material to make satire out of it. So in all those ways, I find humor to be quite an effective way of communication, but at the same time, it is therapeutic.
Interesting.
Therapeutic, that it helps us bear with the pains that we go through. When a visitor comes to Uganda, maybe they would ask themselves, what are these people laughing about? Why are they always, they seem to be entertained by these otherwise obnoxious things. But it's a way of coping.
Yeah, laughter is indeed therapeutic, and with all the problems we have in Uganda, I think we need more laughter. So I wanted to stay with that subject a little bit and ask you at a personal level how you actually got interested in satire and sort of using that genre of artistic work, but also intellectual engagement. And I'm glad that you took time talking about the role of satire and its subversive power. I mean, historically, we know that satire and making fun of the powerful is actually a weapon of the weak, because it's so powerful and yet very easy, very simple, very handy, very accessible, and the powerful cannot do much about it. It's such a subversive tool that is incredibly powerful. How did you get into this, brother?
As I said earlier, it's partly out of my own, should I call it personality, that I love making jokes. But I first noticed, the first site where I saw that it could work was with my mother at home. She was quite a tough lady. So sometimes I would be in a position where I could not get back to her. You're unhappy with what she has done, but you can't really resist or speak back. What would happen in our settings.
Yeah.
So on a few occasions, I drew cartoons and placed them somewhere on the table where I knew that she would see them, or sometimes pushing them under her door. And I would watch from a distance when it was possible. I would watch from a distance, and you see her when she first looks at it, she laughs, and then she puts on this face like she's tough, she's not really moved by the cartoon, but it has softened her, and it makes it easier to engage at that point when she has now calmed down. So that's the first place where I start saying, oh, okay, talking through humor can soften even people who are tough. And I continued using it even in personal engagements, relationships with friends, that when one comes out as so angry, I would react with a joke, and you see that it disarms them. So it's mostly starting from that personality thing, but also a few observations around that show you that this could really work in speaking back to the more powerful. In school, I used it once in a while, but not that much, knowing what our teachers are and how they would speak back to those forms of resistance. So it was until after I start writing, drawing for the Observer, that I pick it up. But I had been using it informally in the everyday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, interesting. As you know, we are in a political environment in Uganda that is less than conducive. Are there political topics that you think no-go zones, no-go areas as far as your satirical work is concerned?
Political, well, topics, I wouldn't say there is any. Personalities, maybe some. I wouldn't say there are any topics because the topics are, most of the ones I would think about are quite huge, and you can always find an angle. The good thing with humor is that you have so many entry points, so you just find one that is relatively safer or relatively acceptable within the circumstances where you're operating from. But in Uganda, there are more allowances when it comes to satire, not allowances because the space is democratic, but because of the general hardships of dealing with humor. The challenge of speaking back to someone who is laughing, or fighting someone who is just who seems to be having fun. Now, when it comes to personalities, there is this general feeling in the Ugandan audience that you do not easily criticize the First Lady. If you're criticizing her, you have to be careful. I've even noticed that she doesn't, I've not seen any interview with the First Lady. Maybe it happened, but I've not seen any, especially where you would have to ask questions freely, spontaneous questions. So when you draw a cartoon of the First Lady, you'll get so many messages from your own friends warning you, I think that's a no-go area. I don't know where this comes from. Maybe they're speaking from experience or what they have heard from the inner circle. But I've still drawn cartoons of the First Lady, and I didn't get any response from her. Maybe I was just lucky. But that's just one of the personalities where it's generally felt that you have to be careful drawing about that. The other subject wouldn't be political, except in a different sense, that is Islamic issues. Yeah.
And talking about personalities, what about you, Sajawa Kabaka? Would you
okay. Yeah.
Satirize the Kabaka?
It's good you have reminded me. It's good you reminded me about that. In fact, I would say that for that, it's even more than with the first one I mentioned. You have to be very careful, not about the officialdom itself, but about, if I'm to use the word subjects, about the lawyers and how they would respond. You see, I've drawn so far, I think, only 2 cartoons of the Kabaka. And all of them were really, I think one was even flattering, or it was supportive of, it was on his side, I would say. It was
a positive depiction.
Yes, yeah, that's when he visited the president. He went to State House around the time when he was sickly. And then Ofono Pondo made a certain comment. He made a certain comment. So I drew him before the president, as though they were in talks, and Ofonopondo was like a dog behind pulling his robes. And I get messages immediately, the Kawaka does not appear in a cartoon. You know, these people are not even interested in knowing what the cartoon was about. Just the Kawaka should not appear in the cartoon. And others saying, no, it starts like that. Even if the cartoon is positive, soon it's going to go to the negative. It's strangely, even when I've drawn cartoons of the Katikiro, the Prime Minister of Uganda, the reaction has been the same amongst certain circles, which in my view, I don't think is a good thing. Yes, I understand that people will always protect those they love, but it creates a culture of cushioning certain institutions and people from criticism, which I think is destructive of the institutions themselves. Yeah, but that's another area. Thanks for reminding me. There I would go very carefully.
Yeah. Let's talk briefly about the exhibitions you've been doing, beginning with the pothole ones and then the health exhibition. How did you sort of start thinking about this approach? It's kind of novel in a sense. And what do you think the intended outcomes are likely to be?
I think there are a number of other people that have done this kind of thing, but maybe in a different way. Even online protests have been there. There were protests for the release of Chagulanyi. I think even Dr. Besigye, in some ways, they have been using them. So the only difference is that this quickly peaked, and it had I would say it didn't get a political identity. So the mobilization was easy to get many people on board. Second, it was quite focused on a particular issue, especially at the beginning with the potholes. And this was an issue that many people would identify with. It's a challenge that many people would associate with, especially those that have lived around Kampala, or reside around Kampala, or used Kampala roads. So how do I get this idea? I had thought it's something that has bothered me for some time, as someone that works around Kampala. Every time you're driving around, the way I drive a very low car, the way I have to negotiate around potholes, how I have to keep a memory of these potholes. And when you're approaching a certain spot, you know, okay, there is a pothole there. Now I have to turn left, I have to turn right, I have to drive in the middle. But then you ask yourself, with all the taxes that we pay, that 40% of 40% is deducted from my salary every month. All these business people in Kampala that are paying taxes, why should the face of the country, face in the sense that it's the capital city, look like this? So one time I'm driving behind someone on Balintuma Road. He appeared to be new to Kampala, so he didn't know how to negotiate like the rest of us did. He didn't have the map, the pothole map. And he bumps into a pothole, and his bumper flies off. I saw the gentleman getting out of the car in frustration. Now, this is where I was immediately tickled, and I started thinking, but if it is speech, people have spoken about potholes. I wasn't the first to talk about them. Many people have spoken. But what can we do that could make these people wake up? So I felt that it had to be something dramatic. It had to be something that exposes, but exposing it in a way that is ridiculous, such that even when these people see the potholes, they'll be overwhelmed. They will not believe that those potholes are in their area of jurisdiction, although they've been operating there. Now, there had been a pothole exhibition earlier, I think around 2006-07, organized by, among others, the deputy speaker now, Honorable Taebo. But it was not, police did not allow it to happen. I think for them, they had arranged to take photos and exhibit them somewhere, just like these normal exhibitions, art exhibitions. So that idea came back, and I thought, okay, now I think I can use this, but online. It would give a perfect picture of everyone posting potholes. So I just sent it out in form of a trial, throwing a stone into the bush to see what happens. I tweeted, a friend of mine is trying to organize a pothole exhibition, but we would want to have a preliminary one on Twitter. And the responses I saw, immediately people were excited about it. Others saying, no, we should start now. That said what, start Monday, and I announced on a Friday. We should start now. So I said, okay, now I think this is going to work. I started thinking through the strategies. I said, okay, now we'll have to tweet under the tweets of all these authorities. Whenever they tweet something, we flood their tweets with potholes. So I called upon people to take as many photos as possible. There was a Kavaka's birthday run to happen that Sunday. And from the response, you could see that people are well equipped. Come Monday, even before I could wake up to start, some people had already started sending in pictures of potholes. What was interesting about this, and what made it more exciting, is that there was humor to it. There was a satirical side to it, that ultimately, at a certain point, even those who had started with trying to resist it, I think they found it entertaining. They also started sharing pictures of potholes. There was a pothole that looked like Mickey Mouse. I think these people also get bored, the ones meant to fix the road. So when they went to dig it up for patching, they did it so neatly, like Mickey Mouse. Now you got others. We had a satirical phase that started 3 days later, where we asked people that, now for all the evidence, the concrete evidence you have shared, now let's start making fun of them. Fun so that we ridicule those who are responsible. Now that's when you saw people photoshopping ships into potholes, putting the president on the boat in a pothole.
that was the, for me, the prize winner, the boat in a pothole pool of water.
And what I said earlier, that there is a way such satire would disarm even those that would be opposed to it. You just find yourself laughing, and when you laugh about something, you feel you should join it. So maybe some joined without knowing that they were part of a protest. So I think at a certain point, even the spokesperson, Kasiate, felt like sharing pictures of potholes, the spokesperson of KCCA. So that's how the idea started. And then later, since it had peaked, they started demanding for another, and we extended it to the one that is running now, the Uganda Health Exhibition.
Interesting. Let me just mention to folks out there in the audience that we shall be taking questions a little bit later. I see Derek has his hand up. So Derek, if you can be patient for a little while, I will still field a few questions with Dr. Ssentongo, and then we shall come back to the questions from the audience. So Jimmy, people are calling you Spire, but you know, you and I go a long time ago. We go way back in time, and I've always called you Jimmy. I hope people don't get confused when I call you Jimmy instead of Spire. Spire has become the household name and the name with which you are most known, but I've always called you Jimmy. So I hope you indulge me in that.
It's fine. It's fine.
So I wanted to sort of switch gears and also remind people that you are known for your satirical work and public engagement, but you're actually an academic. You are a scholar, and a serious one at that, I should say. So I wanted to switch gears and go a little bit into the realm of academia and academic work, where you've done a lot of stuff. And I want to ask you, when you look at the socio-political landscape in a country like Uganda, and indeed on the African continent as a whole, what do you think is or should be the role of the academic? the role of the intellectual, whether you want to call him or her a public intellectual or a committed, academic walled up in the ivory tower. What do you think should be, or what think is the role of the academic or the intellectual, the public intellectual?
Yeah, I think there are various roles, and it would partly depend on which field the academic is in. There are some academics I wouldn't invite, for instance, so much into political discussions, certain kinds of political discussions, but I would also expect them to be playing a certain role. But I would start from observing that in societies like ours, our backgrounds, maybe me or maybe you and some others, society invests a lot in us. It's actually a privilege for one to have acquired the kind of education me and you have, because we know that there are so many others who would have wished to have it, but they cannot, not out of their making. Circumstances cannot allow them to. We know that some of our parents are poor, they of low means, or they come from quite far to push us to where we are. I find it unfair and irresponsible that after society has invested in us that much, or even if it's not that society, even if we say that maybe we are beneficiaries of scholarships and all that, still you're among those that have managed to get that opportunity. So I find it irresponsible and unfair to our communities that you get there and you choose to keep quiet. You get there and you choose to mind what immediately affects you. Many of us as academics today in Uganda, we have chosen silence, partly because of the circumstances, but also because increasingly we are more concerned about bread and butter issues. We are more concerned about what we are getting at an individual level. Our salaries, I think, Khisa, you know that, for instance, if I was to look at Makerere alone, there has been a history to protest at Makerere, to demonstrations or issues around which you would have some sort of pushing back. When you look at the 60s, 70s, yes, you would have issues surrounding welfare, but you would also have national issues amongst those that students and even staff would be agitating around. Coming to the maybe fast forward to the 2000s, that is almost totally silenced. You hardly find academics that rally around matters of national interest. They say speaking about political matters, speaking about what happens in parliament. Whenever we come out, let's say as Mwasa is speaking about mostly welfare issues. That is the selfishness that I'm talking about. And directly now speaking to your question, I think that an academic, as someone who is privileged, someone who has managed to climb up to that level with all that education, society expects that we should be guiding, and of course not being paternalistic, not in a condescending way that we are the only ones that understand the issues, but guiding where there is need to guide. We should be seen to be involved in discussions, in debates where our knowledge matters. If it's agriculture that you're seeing academics quite engaged in debates on agriculture, debates on, of late, it's homosexuality, that we in philosophy should be seen there, debates on politics, political scientists, philosophers, sociologists. But when we are quiet on such matters, and we are concentrating on teaching in classrooms, I think that somehow it's to demote ourselves. It's
I share that sentiment, and my own personal perspective on this has been that it's morally unacceptable for academics to disengage, to abdicate, and to resign from the public square, because if there's one class and segment of society that should step forward and speak out, it is the academic class, because you and I know that the rigors we go through in some ways through our training are supposed to sort of liberate us in many ways, liberate us from from fear, liberate us from insecurity, liberate us from being beholden to any particular interests. Somebody like you with a PhD, you're not desperate for a job, and job security is not an issue. With your PhD, there are so many things you can do. You don't sit there and get so worried that Uganda Matters University because is going to fire you, or Makerere is going to fire you. I mean, they could fire you today, and tomorrow you're going to do other things with your PhD and with your knowledge and with your resources and networks. And so job security, which is what is a concern for many people, why many people choose silence, why many people do not speak out, it's because they are scared for their jobs, for their futures, for their livelihoods. But an academic, as far as I'm concerned, is liberated from that sense of insecurity. But also I think that as you rightly put it, there's so much that as an academic you owe to society. You and I, in many ways, have been beneficiaries of the Ugandan taxpayer. And many of us actually don't get to pay back, in any serious way. When we teach in a university like Makerere, we teach and we are paid a salary. So in a sense, we're not giving back anything, because we are providing labor for which we are, compensated. So beyond, the classroom work and teaching, what is our role in society? And this is something that has personally, interested me and occupied my imagination for a long time. The abdication by the academic, by the intellectual, and somehow taking choosing to stay in the comfort of quiet, and in the security of our privileges and of our niceties that are going on. I think it's morally wrong, and it's something that we are culpable for, many of us. So I wanted to sort of quickly also ask you to comment on the institution. I mean, we look at a university like Makerere, which is our premier university. What do you think should its role be in society? What's the role of the public university, especially in the 21st century?
I think the role may not be one. There are quite a number of roles. First of all, if we look at the traditional sense in which a university is understood, or in which the roles of a university are defined, you'll talk about community outreach, you talk about research and teaching, whereby all these ultimately are meant to be serving society in one way or the other. That when you're teaching, you're contributing to training human resource mass to do different kinds of things in different sectors. In community outreach, it's mostly what we have been talking about, getting out there, contributing to debates, contributing to different ways in which you can inform what is going around using the knowledge that you are privileged to have. Now, when it comes to the aspect of research, where I think we keep emphasizing and we are increasingly saying this is a research-centered university, yes, I think a lot of research is going on, be it at Makerere, Uganda Matters University, or other universities. A lot of research is going on. But the important question is whether this research is informing the realities in the country, whether this research is actually beneficial to the country, beneficial to our people. I cannot generalize and speak with one brush to say that maybe all of it is helpful or all of it is not helpful. But I would speak specifically to one kind of one phenomenon that is increasingly gaining space in academia, that is publishing as some sort of a marathon that is simply meant to chase promotion. You get so many people with so many publications. One tells you they have over 20, 30 journal articles. but no one even knows what those journal articles are about, what you're talking about. The most important thing, even to the one that is publishing, is just to publish. So publishing becomes an end in itself. You do not really care, for some, whether you're read or not. All you care is to count, and then ultimately that it contributes to your promotion. In the past, you would have books. So if you would know, if you are told that so-and-so is a professor, you would expect, okay, there is a book you could attach to their name. And this is not really to deride or to speak low of journal articles. I know there is much they can do, which books cannot do. But also that with a book, there is it gives you the opportunity to comprehensively communicate your idea on a particular subject, which I think a professor should be able to have. Increasingly, you have professors without any book. They have papers scattered here and there, whereby even in their own communities, if you ask, this is a professor, do you know any work of theirs or anything, their contribution to knowledge, because we are boasting primarily to be contributing to knowledge through our research. But if your community doesn't even have an idea of the contribution you're making and how helpful it is to your society, I find that quite ironical, and maybe that we have become mere performers of a game that is shaped from without. We simply want to fit in, that this is how the academy is supposed to run by international standards. Let's say how it's run there in the US, where maybe the culture of reading is a bit higher. You would expect that I can find an ordinary person reading Khisa's book. In Uganda, I don't expect, given even the language in which we write, which in itself is, it defeats the purpose. You ask yourself now, if your reason is to communicate, why do you deliberately write in a complicated language that alienates your people from what you're writing? So we write.
There is this rather, I don't know, misguided view that has been out there for a long time, which is that, complicated language, or what we like calling dense prose, is subversive. It's meant to, it's meant to be used as a weapon. My response to that is that, how subversive are you when what you're putting across, what you're putting out there cannot be understood by the people you're supposed to be subversive against? Where is the subversion if you cannot write to be understood? If you cannot communicate, if the stuff you're saying doesn't make sense to the people reading it, I don't see the value. I don't see the subversion.
It really defeats the purpose, because you're writing to communicate, and at the same time you're making it difficult for people to read. So when you combine that form of writing and the fact that even reading here is generally a problem, but we stick to those traditional standards of evaluating who an academic is or who is really contributing to scholarship. Here, for instance, at Makerere, I know Sister Dr. Dominic DiPio, if you know her, Professor Dominic DiPio.
I do.
That she had a struggle to convince certain people that the films she has been making are also publications of a sort, that they are academic output that should be counted. Yet you would find that people associate, or they relate easier to those kinds of publications than to those that we privilege, high impact factor journals, which are quite important. But I think in a way we are failing to tailor our knowledge generation or the research that we are doing to our circumstances, to our people, to see to it that they can be translated into practical things. They can be translated into informing society. I would give you an example from my discipline, philosophy. If you asked maybe a number of my colleagues in the department to say what philosophy is in their mother tongue, many of us cannot. If you asked me to teach logic in Luganda, I remember I started One time I went to the village and my aunt was asking me, so what is it exactly that you teach?
Yeah.
It's because I also teach research that was easy to explain. But when it
Mm.
came to philosophy, I really had to struggle to explain to her the metaphysics, to explain to her logic, epistemology. But after that struggle, I asked myself, but what does this really mean?
Mm. Mm.
If I even have to struggle to explain to my people what it is that I'm teaching, and that applies to the knowledge that we generate in our publications. I'm not saying that we have to limit our scope to our communities, because there is also international communication that you have to speak to a wider range of colleagues internationally. But you do not do that by totally alienating, by totally excluding your people. So I think we have to think of alternative forms of communication, of dissemination of knowledge, and making them also count, not bundling all of them together and say that this is community outreach. The other example I would give you, see all the cartoons that I draw, which is partly an effort in some of them to speak philosophy in simpler ways that can communicate to a wider audience. All those cartoons wouldn't count even a single dot to my promotion. It's just bundled together as community community outreach.
No, when
you will be asked, where are the articles?
When it comes to evaluating your scholarly output, that your cartoon work and your newspaper work doesn't count at all. It will not be seen as intellectual output, and yet you dispense a lot of intellectual bandwidth in doing that stuff. It's not easy work to do at all. And by the way,
in terms of engagement as well, I get more engagement from the cartoons.
That's actually what I was going to say, that the impact, talking about what public impact that kind of work has compared to the stuff that we value so much in our high impact journals and whatever. The impact journal impact is in a very narrow community of academics, of scholars. But beyond that, the journals we publish in, nobody in the public sphere knows about these journals or cares about the stuff we do there. So I like your candor, by the way, in speaking to the relevance of our scholarship. And I know some of the things you said may not be very welcome to many of our colleagues, especially senior colleagues, but I think you've been very candid. We publish journal articles scattered all over the place, but where is our signature intellectual output that somebody can say, Moses,
this is the magnus opus of Moses.
This is the work he's done, and we can sort of hold it together and put it on the table and see the depth, the breadth, the concrete output that somebody can engage with in a very serious way. We are going to switch to the audience in a moment, but I wanted to just quickly ask you, and if you can say this as quickly as you can in maybe 30 seconds, what has been your experience like writing the column for The Observer? I know you do the cartoon stuff, some of which you actually publish on social media. What about writing the column? Something that, as you know, I've been doing as well. And we used to write together for The Observer. And then I bailed out and moved on. But you're still with The Observer. Now I'm with the Monitor. But it's been, for me, it's been now 10 years of writing every week. Not an easy thing to do, but I've hung in there. What has been your experience like?
First, maybe my experience using the form of communication that I use. Many of my articles are satirical. Actually, I just noticed that of late I'm moving away from the satirical writing, getting to be more direct. Someone asked me recently, what's happening to you? It appears you're getting angrier. You're getting more angry because you can no longer even speak the satire. You have to address people directly. So with the experience writing satirically, I would get so much feedback from people. First, they laugh about it, but then second, they say, But even being able to laugh about these things in itself, it's liberating in a way that it gives you a chance to reflect. But it also makes you feel foolish that now all you can do is laugh. And some would ask, but how do you even manage to create humor about these painful things? Some of the topics you write about should be topics where we expect people to quarrel, where we expect that when one is writing, they are really furious. But then you just get a way of spinning them around and finding a joke to spice them up. So it was also my own way of remaining sane, but at a different level beyond the method. I think writing for the papers, there is a way it keeps me in touch with my community. There is a way it makes me feel relevant. When I teach in class, yes, I'm making a contribution, a significant one maybe in some ways. But when I'm able to write in papers that I know are read by hundreds or thousands of people, I'm increasing the scope of my audience. Where your articles reach, the articles in Monitor, I don't know whether your journal articles have been able to get to all those parts of Uganda. If you mention Khisa, yes, some people might know Khisa as an academic in Uganda, but I think what immediately comes to mind are the articles they have seen in Monitor or in Observer, or having listened to you on radio, on TV. Not to say that what we do in class is not important, but this spreads you out to be beneficial to more people. It spreads you out to speak to a wider audience, but it also increases the, as you said earlier, that this is a moral responsibility. It makes you feel human. It makes you feel concerned about the things that are happening around you. Sometimes you sit in office at university and you listen, you read news, and you also look at colleagues that are just going about their normal routines, not saying anything except in whispers. And you ask yourself, what exactly are they thinking? Are they satisfied when they look at their output? Are they satisfied that that is all an academic should be doing? So that's basically, in short, what writing in the papers makes me feel like: relevance, increasing my audience, but also having that relief within myself, not to be haunted my conscience, to let ask myself, when all this was happening, what did you say? What did you do? I'll say that at least I spoke, at least I tried to write in the papers. I could not go to the streets, but I wrote about it. So there is a way in which it helps in absolving myself and permitting me to live with myself.
I think you're right. It's intellectually gratifying and satisfying to be able to make a public contribution. We're coming to the top of the hour. We'll have another 30 minutes, Jimmy, if that's okay with you. So we go up to 1/2 the next hour.
It's okay.
So we'll use that next half hour for questions from the audience. I think let's actually delve into the audience questions right away. Derek had been the first person who had his hand up. Derek, are you still there? Would you like to ask a question or make a comment? Derek, if you are there, you can unmute and ask a question or comment. Okay, looks like Derek may have dropped off. We'll get him when he comes back. Peter Kwame, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Spire?
Go ahead, he can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. I'll be happy if you permit me to penetrate the clouds and go back to the Greeks. And the
other examiner is from South Africa. So it's right now. There are like 3 examiners.
Now somebody is interfering with us. I don't know who that is. Can they mute?
So, like I was saying, to go
Peter.
back to the Greeks and come back. I know the business of satire was very critical in the ancient societies like Greece. And if I recall, it is through this political satire that our philosopher Socrates was actually imprisoned by the Athenian authority at the time after Aristophanes has staged his play titled The Clouds. So issues of satire is not really about the laughter, it's about the seriousness behind, as Dr. Spire is doing. But looking at the Machiavellian kind of leadership that is seen in Africa, though we claim we are practicing democracy, which we actually do not understand what it means. I would like to know how do you anticipate the future of the satirist and political satire? Because of its seriousness, as the Greeks attached, the Roman politicians did not entertain it at all, for which reason they did not adopt and adapt Aristophanic comedies to their theater. So looking at this connection and how politicians especially take or perceive satire, how do you anticipate the future of the satirist and political satire in Africa and especially in Uganda? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Jimmy, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Yeah, first of all, thanks, Kwame, for the question. Quite interesting. I like the way you pitch it into ancient philosophy. And it's interesting that you bring in Socrates and the reason for which he was killed. It started with the satirization of what he was doing by Aristophanes in the Clouds, and partly informing the decision of Plato, Socrates' teacher. Plato was so opposed to satire, so opposed to comedy, and humor generally says that humor is immoral, according to Plato. That is immoral because it always involves one person feeling superior over the other. You cannot make fun of another person except if you feel superior over them. But over time, this theory has been overtaken. I think it had been triumphant for some time up to the 17th, 18th century, the time of Hobbes, then come to Freud, the psychologist, and it starts turning around to the relief theory that actually humor is not always about feeling superior over your victim, but it's sometimes about trying to get relief, trying to find a way of offloading a certain burden off your head or off your shoulders by being able to laugh at something. So not every time you're laughing, you're paradoxically feeling superior about it. But now the question that you bring at the end, what do I think about the future of satire, especially with the diminishing space for political expression or expression generally about opinions that some people could be uncomfortable with? I cannot clearly tell the future because in some senses, the future can surprise us. When we think that it's going this direction, it ends up in another direction. Yeah, we could look at certain indicators and be able to predict, let's say in Uganda, that if so-and-so comes into power, I think it's going to get worse. I personally get concerned when I see certain people gaining some ground in terms of them getting bolder and claiming political space, a certain camp that I know is responsible for torturing some people and for maybe also pushing for the drone phenomenon that we have been talking about recently. So when you see such things, you get worried that if they can be this intolerant when they are outside power, what will happen when they are in? President Museveni is intolerant in many ways politically, especially to those that come closer to threatening his seat, but he also has some bit of tolerance that little credit I would give him. There are certain things he can choose to ignore. For all these years we have been drawing cartoons, all the years he has been in power, I think I've only heard him comment about cartoons once or twice. Yet I think even if I was the one, I would find it very difficult to ignore cartoonists, because sometimes I draw a cartoon and I imagine myself in the position of the person on the receiving end, and I say, if I was the one, I don't know how I would have reacted. So for one to ignore you for all those years and not comment, I think there is some credit to give there. But where it's going, yes, I know that in some African countries like Rwanda, they find ways of criminalizing it. In Zimbabwe, there are many things of the kind we draw, which I cannot draw about. Although I'm always quick to add that we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to the worst if we want to move forward. Let's compare ourselves to those who are doing relatively better. So very precisely the future, I don't know. If it turns out in a better direction, well and good. If it turns out in the other direction, as a satirist,
we shall have to live with that.
Yes, as a satirist, you try to adjust. It's often observed that opposition is often shaped by the shape of oppression. So the shape that the oppression will take will determine which direction we'll move to. Some of the things we are doing now were not effective before. We did not think about using those methods before. But when they change method in some ways, you see another tactic emerging that you never thought about before.
That's right. Yep, absolutely. Dr. Henny Alava, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I guess we go back a long time too, since I say Jimmy instead of Spire, but thank you so much for that incredibly inspiring talk. I just want to say, as one of the Uganda scholars from a Western university in Finland, that I too am deeply inspired by what you are saying. I think it is really important for us to recognize that this question of societal relevance is one that cuts and should be cutting across academia, where both universities and scholars in the global north and in Africa are in the same boat, that we are fighting against different kinds of forces. For instance, in our own government, we are going to be having a right-wing government coming into power anytime now. And as academics, we need to say why we are doing what we are doing and what the relevance of our work is, as we are facing the threat of severe cuts. So I really just want to say that I think it's really important that we find connections across these boundaries, because this question of societal relevance should be something that we're all plagued by and that's keeping us from sleeping. But that said, I just wanted to share an interesting anecdote that I came across really recently, which was specifically to the question of whether academic articles can be relevant societally. And I was really interested to find that an article I wrote with a colleague of mine on church land conflicts in Uganda some time ago. Some years ago, I just noticed on ResearchGate that it's had over 1,000 reads, over 70% of which are by people who are not members of ResearchGate, but by other people. And what I think might be relevant there is that I had the luck of having a co-author who kept saying, "What do you mean? What do you mean? Say it more clearly," which just really speaks to me of how even academic articles published, as long as they're open access, but published in academic journals, can be accessible. So I would say it's not either or, but that if we could only find the ways to find the best of both worlds. Anyway, these just thoughts. And then a question, or a question maybe. Over the years, having done research in Uganda, I have repeatedly been posed the question, what would you have us do, by Ugandan scholars saying, what would you have me do? I'm at the risk of losing everything. I'm at the risk of losing my job, whatever Moses says about it, you not having the risk of job insecurity, but people saying that their lives, the lives of their family members, their income might be threatened if they were to speak out. What's your comment on that? Because I know we've known each other for a long time, and I've often asked you, why are you not scared? And And I think part of the answer to that is that you are so visible. If something were to happen to Jimmy Spire, the world would go nuts. Like there would be a huge outpour of support and visibility on Twitter. But how about those scholars who are younger, lower down the steps, the ones who don't have that public visibility? Where is it that you would encourage or inspire them to find their courage, to be meaningful, and to dare to speak to power in your society?
Thank you, Henny. Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Henny. Yeah, it's indeed always been a pleasure working with you on those different publications. And I like the way you often emphasize the idea that we should try to publish open access, which shows concern that our work should be read. And especially by those that cannot manage the pay walls behind some of these publications in those high journals. Yeah, I agree with you that it shouldn't be either academic publications or publication in popular press or other means. As I said earlier, we should look for alternatives, but this should depend on the circumstances, the situation. That we shouldn't have universal dissemination modes that are sort of blind to the situations in which academics thrive. For instance, the example you cite about 70% being read by people beyond the academia, we might as well want to know where those people are from. You might still find that many of them are from the West, that if it was, let's say, Uganda, an article written by Ugandan, the percentage would even be much lower. But still, I agree with you that we should consider all to be important, but as well be able to assess who are we writing for all this stuff that we are writing, we are disseminating, who is listening, where is our audience, and not simply perform it because that's what we are expected to be doing by the standards. What do I say to those who fear to lose their jobs? Those who have a higher price to pay. Maybe I'm more visible, and that is some sort of protection for me. I think Henny and maybe Moses, you know that I've been writing and drawing cartoons about the same kind of things for so many years. I'm only becoming more visible now, but I have been at it for so many years. And the things that I'm saying now, I was saying them before. If you read the articles that I wrote in 2008 or 2007, you'll find that they're using the same language. They are speaking to power in almost the same tone. Maybe I would say that that is the foolhardy side of me that I wouldn't advise other people to, to take on. Perhaps I've been lucky that I've survived with that approach for so many years. Others might not be that lucky. But the other thing I would say about that is it depends on many things. It depends on many factors. I wouldn't expect to see many spires out there. I would expect to see more people doing what they can do, of course, but increasingly challenging themselves, increasingly pushing themselves to do more and not just settling within our comfort zones. Sometimes we say that we are doing what we can do, yet we have limited the definition of what we can do. I know some people might not have the courage of speaking out for a number of reasons. Some of these, they're actually personality issues that we cannot change. For instance, in my case, if you asked me to go to the streets to protest, it will take a lot of convincing to take me there. Maybe you'll even have to bring a grader to pull me to the streets because given my personality, I know that that's something that would be very difficult for me to do. So let everyone do what they can do. It would be prudent to measure the risks and to know what we can go in for and what we can't go in for, but not measure them to an extent where we limit ourselves so much as not to say anything. many of the people that we admire in life, especially within the political realm, are people that have taken risks. Even within the academic realm, they've had to take risks in one way or the other. Not stupid or careless risks, but they have been able to take risks. In Ugandan circles, scholarly circles, once you start talking about prominent scholars, you'll hear people mention Mazrui, or they'll mention Mamdani, they'll mention Buru Gumayo, and some of those people, the earlier ones, the Gang of Four, and then, yes, in Sivambi. But one of the reasons we are giving those as examples is because they had certain risks to take. Their scholarship as well, but it goes beyond their scholarship. Now, this is not to advise all emerging scholars that they should be out there on a confrontational, confrontational scholarship. Maybe some might not be shaped for that. Maybe some might not be as lucky as I am. But all I can say is that there is no one script for everyone. Let everyone try what they can do. But I agree with you, I'm more visible, and that becomes some sort of protection for me. Although it is something that we are seeing now, the visibility came out of a long
time of work, after a long time of work.
Doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think Henny raised an important point, but I think we need to put this in proper context. You know, you've been writing for the Observer since perhaps, before you finished your PhD. I was writing for the Observer when I was still a student, when I had no name at all, when I had, when I was nobody, completely nobody. Maybe I'm still a nobody now, but I think it's for me, it's a convenient excuse for anybody to say that they cannot speak out because they fear for their job security, particularly for senior academics. We're not talking about, young folks, junior folks who are just trying to find their way in academia. We're talking about senior people at Makerere, who actually have really nothing to lose by being bold and doing their bit as public intellectuals. And as I said earlier, I don't want to sound dismissive, but my view is that you have a PhD in a country like Uganda, you are in a sense liberated from any, sort of feeling of insecurity about a job, there are so many things you can do. You don't have to feel like you cannot speak because you'll not be able to have a job tomorrow. I don't know. That's sort of my sentiment. I could be wrong, but I think that people who hold back from speaking out are doing so conveniently, and I think it's just morally unjustifiable. But that's just my view, Henny. Our colleague Dr. Bruce Lockhart has been keeping an eye on the questions in the chat. Kate, do we have any questions there for Jimmy? Kate, can you get us the chat questions, please? I could look at them too. Let me see. Okay, let me see what's in the chat.
I can see one here. If the rate of publishing by the academicians was similar to the rate of performance in addressing community needs, Uganda would be a shining country. I think this is a comment.
Yeah, that was a comment. And then I think there was a question from, let me see.
Patrick.
Yeah, from Patrick, yeah. Maybe you can take that.
Is there financial incentive for an academic to become a public intellectual who disseminates knowledge in a way the public can relate to? Is there, isn't? What incentive is there?
Yeah.
Not directly. First of all, I think that the reason one should go out to become a public intellectual is not because there is a financial incentive. So if it comes about, it should only be a consequence, but not the motivation. because it might not necessarily come about. Some get known and established, and out of that, they are able to make money, if that's what you mean. They're able to get projects out of their visibility, financial grants and all that. But it shouldn't be the incentive. That's what I would emphasize. And I think this goes back to the idea that many of us have come to be to consider financial incentives as the most important thing, as the primary reason as to why we end up in scholarship, or as to why we become academics. And where that is the primary motivation, it leads to the problems that we are grappling with. Once you're there, you keep quiet. So I have my projects here. Why should I even speak? Why should I become a public intellectual when I have $1 million projects? And that's what is happening to a number of academics in institutions. They feel that if I speak, I'm going to be ejected out of the university. Once I'm ejected, I don't have an address, and that's going to affect my projects. Yeah. And they end up gagging themselves. So yes, those incentives are there in a number of ways, not really direct in some cases, but they shouldn't be the primary motivation.
Yep, good. And then Scovia asks, Professor Spire, what does one have to do if you find yourself in a scenario whereby you have the right information that can save the community, maybe serve the community, she meant, but you are being shut down by the power holders, e.g., the technical team being supervised by the political team, like our management systems that we see today?
Well, I don't know. It would depend on the circumstances. I cannot answer that in very general terms. But if I get a sense of what she's saying, you can go through someone else. You don't always have to be the one to speak about it. There are people who have been sending me information during these exhibitions. People who are in circumstances where they cannot speak, but somehow they manage to sneak the information. Maybe that person is saying, what happens if even if I sneak it, they'll know that it came from me. It will depend on the circumstances.
And then Olivia asks, my view is that though this country does laugh a lot, after people laugh, some few take time to reflect on what they have been laughing at. But the recent trend of direct involvement of the audience through public exhibitions may trigger more of our anger that arises from frustrations as citizens. Might you be taking the latter road, which is anger that arises from frustrations as citizens, instead of the satirical means we are used to? If so, why? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed the last bit.
Yeah, so she's asking, basically she's saying that the recent trend of direct involvement of the audience through public exhibitions may trigger more of our anger that arises from our frustrations as citizens. Might you be taking the latter road, meaning, the anger road, instead of the satirical means we are used to? If so, why?
I don't think it's either or. Sometimes we are at one point, at other times we are at another point. Sometimes we are too angry and we cannot even make any humor out of the anger. At other points, we are able to joke about something. So it depends on what we are dealing with. It depends on the particular instance. It also depends on the end that we want to achieve. You have seen during the exhibitions that there are moments where people had to share hard evidence of what is the state of the roads or what is happening in our hospitals. And then another occasion where they've had to joke about it. There is a certain hilarious young man called King Fahad on Twitter. He, during the health exhibition, he took the president around dilapidated centers in Uganda. He would simply Photoshop the image of the president and place him somewhere as if he's walking through a dilapidated building. And it brings entertainment. It brings some sort of relief to our condition. But that relief should not be an end in itself, that once we get it, once we get that feeling, what there is an author, Greg Benton, he calls it, he says that humor creates a sweet illusion of revenge. You feel you're revenging, okay, I've hurt the president by positioning him in such a place, but it is all fleeting. It's just within a moment after a short a moment it's gone and you're left with the problem that you're dealing with. So that's why I'm saying that you can use a combination of all these emotions, a combination of all these moods, as in a certain upcoming article we are writing with Henny, where we are discussing different citizenship moods in Uganda. So the anger, all that emotive part, and
Satire.
the satire, it can all be combined and utilized in ways in which we measure it to what we want to achieve.
Yeah, we're running out of time, have a few minutes left on the clock, but David says, it's sad to note that the culture of research is at threat. Young people today do not understand its process and need. Lecturing has missed the concept of teaching and learning, making young people unable to confidently approach society issues as learned persons. Speak up, write about a recommended action. They can't think of how, why, and when to apply their knowledge. How should institutions / individuals empower learning? It's his question.
Quite a huge one. How should institutions empower learning? I don't think I even have a direct answer, because I will talk about so many things. It depends on which learning we are talking about, in what conditions, or learning to what purposes. But what I would say, still in very general terms, is that all learning should be emancipatory. All learning should be about equipping the mind with tools or with capacities of reasoning, capacities of reflecting about our conditions, be it within agriculture, be it within politics or whatever, but not simply, as has become the trend in many of our institutions, simply banking, if I'm to use the that concept of, who is that? Pedagogy of the oppressed. Of the Freirean concept that we just bank into the head, and then someone just downloads what we are banked into the head, but it's not really emancipating them. It's not making them critical of their circumstances. So I think learning should be geared towards that, but it still depends on the.
We have two hands up. We'll end with those, but before we do, let's take Ssentongo in the chat first. Ssentongo says, Makerere used to be a center of intellectualism and often held open talks and debates on different contemporary issues with scholars, politicians, and other public figures. This no longer seems to be the case. Does this imply that the public sphere at universities, which fueled awareness, is now dead, based on the Makerere example? Maybe not.
Maybe not totally dead. Not totally dead. I know there are certain voices here and there are also certain other attempts. I don't want to give the impression that we should all use speech in the same way. They don't all have to come out in the papers or come out on social media. I know there are certain other forms of speech that are used, but there are also so many others that are quiet. And maybe what we are not discussing is how the national mood is informing the moods that you see down, how it is cascading down into the institutions. There is an atmosphere of fear that you sense even within the university, that people do not want to discuss certain topics. People seem to fear their leaders. When you mention certain issues, they say, no, that is political. I don't want to go there. Oh, no, I still want my job. But also the other phenomenon in universities now, some public universities, and I think Makerere could be one of the biggest victims of that. You have professors that are very vulnerable. You have professors that cannot say anything because they feel that they can easily fail to get contracts, especially post-retirement contracts. Since after retirement, one can only get 2 or 4 or 5-year contracts, depending on their level. And they know that if you're not in the right book, sometimes that might mean you're not getting the contract. Many of them have gagged themselves. Many of them have, even those that used to speak, they have withdrawn into silence. And I think this is quite unfortunate for a university, that you get professors being castrated like that. It defeats the reason as to why you should have a professor at a university in society. A professor that cannot speak, is what are you left with?
Let's
Yeah.
take the two hands that are up, and then we'll wrap up there, and Jimmy will take those two at once. So Patrick or Tim, I think, please unmute and ask your question real briefly, brother, in 30 seconds. And then Chris Muhozi will follow.
I am not asking a question. I'm making a suggestion to Uganda Studies Association.
Please do.
And the suggestion is I wish you could take up the issue of the role of academia in Uganda. I think there's need for a panel, to discuss really this role. I think it's really an important issue because it seems to me there is a thinking around what should really be the role of academics, And I think, you and Dr. Ssentongo sounded critical, but I think I might have a different view. And I do think differently about my position and what I should really be doing. And I think it's really an important issue. I think it's also an old debate. It started in the 1960s if we go back. And I think it's really an important point to, revisit some of those old debates and really rethink our role in the present moment.
Fair enough, Patrick. My colleague John R. will help organize symposium on this for Uganda Studies Group, and Patrick will be more than welcome to participate. Chris, ask your question, brother, as quickly as you can.
Thank you so much, Andy. My apologies, I'm on the road and a better part of the road. Jim, thank you so much for your talk, for the answers. So I have two issues. One, could you speak to your choice of the word exhibition? You could have used protest. I understand the satire behind, but I don't want to make assumptions since you are here. I'm curious why you chose to call it an exhibition. Secondly, kind of appending my question to Hani Arava's concern is, so people have been applauding this approach, saying that it doesn't put those who are participating in harm's way. And I'm wondering, are you in a position, as far as you know, is there anybody who has been threatened or actually harmed because of their participation in the roads and now the ongoing Health exhibition? Otherwise, thank you so much, and thank you so much for inspiring and encouraging several other people. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Jimmy, would you like to take a minute or two to respond to Chris and Patrick, and then we shall wrap up business?
Okay, thank you, Chris. Why did I call it an exhibition? It's because we are basically exhibiting, we are basically showing, but well, that is the direct answer I would give. But the one behind the curtain is, it would be difficult to stop someone from exhibiting, or it would be difficult to find issues with a person who says that they are simply exhibiting. You're simply showing, but it's also inviting. If we called it Kampala pothole protest, I think some would immediately feel, no, I don't want to participate in a protest. But if it's just an exhibition, everyone would be welcome. And that's what I talked about earlier, the satirical side to this. Satire is quite inviting, that anyone who would want to anyone who would hear about something that is funny, something that is humorous, they would feel they want to be part of it. They feel invited. So that is what informs the name, but also the idea that I had heard about it before. Anyone that has been harmed, there has been comparison between what we have been doing and protests on streets, which I appreciate in ways in which they talk about the benefits or the advantages of online protests, of Twitter protests. But sometimes the impression that is given, which I want to steer clear from, is trying to show that those who are on the streets are in obsolete spaces. Those who are on streets are now in outdated spaces. They should now think about mobilizing on online. I think this is deliberately meant to demobilize others who are using other means. In fact, I've even seen attempts at trying to pit our efforts against those of other opposition players, Dr. Besigye, Chagulanyi saying, Besigye, with your protests, you failed, but now you see what Spire is realizing with the exhibition. Besigye did what he did given the circumstances and the means that were available at the time, but also his abilities. If you ask me to do what he did, I don't think I can even go to fraction of a quarter or 1/8 of what he was able to do. So there are different spaces, different means that we can use, and you choose according to your abilities, or you choose according to what you think is appropriate to the times, appropriate to what you want to achieve. I've not heard of anyone that has been harmed or arrested. Maybe they are there. If someone is threatened, this has been, it's not really centralized. I'm there as a figure, but everyone has been exhibiting on their Twitter space. I don't know if someone was threatened from wherever, but I don't think that should be the measure of its success. Even when people are arrested or they are threatened on the street, there is a success in that. That should be measured differently from what is done online.
We have to wrap up things, but Chris, did you want to say something else as a follow-up?
Not really.
Okay,
Not really.
okay.
I think Jimmy did a good job of responding to my question.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Okay. I saw your hand up again. I thought you wanted to say something. We really have to end business here, but before we go, I'm actually going to hand back to my colleague, John Al, who is back here from teaching. So, John, you're going to help bring this to an end and thank our speaker this afternoon.
Thank you all very much for joining us today. As I've noted in the chat, I certainly have learned much from Professor Spire, and I'm grateful that we could have this time. And Jimmy, we're very grateful for your work, your creativity, and taking the time to be with us today, as we know that you maintain a very, very busy schedule. So we are indebted and deeply honored to have you with us today. So thank you very much. And once again, thank you, everyone, and many thanks to my esteemed colleague, Moses Khisa, who, as is our custom, has done a phenomenal job. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Jimmy, and thanks, everybody, for joining. This has been great.
Thank you, and have a great evening.
Jimmy,
I really appreciate that.
Jimmy, can you hang on for a second? Don't drop off yet. I need to speak to you about something.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.